This action will have consequences. It's a deceptively simple phrase, appearing quietly in the corner of your screen. Early on in Life is Strange. Just another gameplay prompt. Blink and you might miss it. But these 5 words echo far beyond their function. They're not just a reminder of branching dialogue or in-game choices. They're the existential heartbeat of the story itself, a soft, spoken warning. And the truth we spent the rest of the game learning the hard way, that even the smallest decision can ripple outward. Life is Strange was developed by Don't Not Entertainment and released episodically in 2015. It's a narrative-driven adventure game that follows Maxine Caulfield, Max for short, a quiet, introspective high school senior studying photography in the fictional coastal town of Arcadia Bay, Oregon. The story unfolds across 5 episodes, but what truly sets the game apart is its central mechanic and its emotional core, Max's ability to rewind time. At first this power feels thrilling, a second chance at every conversation, a way to undo mistakes, to fix what's broken. But the game doesn't let you live in that fantasy for long, because every change, every rewind comes with a cost. And the more Max alters the past, the more tangled and devastating the consequences become. At the heart of the story is Max's reunion with Chloe Price, her estranged childhood friend. Chloe is angry and grieving. When the two begin investigating the disappearance of Chloe's close friend, Rachel Amber, they uncover a web of secrets hiding just beneath Arcadia Bay's picturesque surface. As the mystery deepens, so does a sense of something larger, something more terrifying closing in. Max begins to experience visions of a massive, apocalyptic storm bearing down on Arcadia Bay. At first it's just a nightmare, but soon it feels real, inevitable, and increasingly she suspects this disaster is no accident. Maybe the consequence of her own choices, of her time-warping interventions catching up with her. As players guide Max through this unraveling world, they are asked to make choice after choice, some subtle, some life-altering. And the consequences? They're rarely immediate, often they are delayed, ambiguous, and emotionally devastating. This isn't a morality system with neat scores. Unlike traditional linear narrative, Life is Strange embraces a branching structure. It gives players the power to shape relationships, redirect fates, and define who Max becomes, not just by what she says or does, but by what she's willing to live with. And yet, for these permutations, the game narrows in the end into a single impossible decision. Sacrifice Chloe to save Arcadia Bay, or let the town fall to preserve the person you love. It's a binary choice, yes, but it's also the purest expression of the game's central conflict. The tension between fate and freedom, between the personal and the collective, between the love that defines us and the world that demands something more. Critics and players alike praised Life is Strange for its emotional honesty, character complexity and atmospheric depth. What truly sets it apart is how it makes you feel the weight of growing up, not just as a transition, but as a series of ethical trials, moments where identity, memory and grief intersect. In that sense, Life is Strange isn't just a game. It's a coming-of-age story in the tradition of classic literature, but here it's interactive, intimate. To fully understand how Life is Strange explores adolescence, identity and personal growth, we have to begin with the tradition it draws from, a genre known as the Bildungsroman. The word comes from German, Bildung meaning education or formation, and Roman meaning novel. A Bildungsroman is in essence a coming-of-age story, but it's more than just growing up, it's about transformation, about how a young protagonist navigates the often painful journey from innocence to self-awareness, from isolation to integration. This tradition took shape in the late 18th and 19th century, perhaps most famously in Johann Wolfgang von Goethe's Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship, first published in the 1790s. In stories like these, we follow a young person who begins in a state of dissatisfaction, confusion or alienation. That inner tension pushes them outward on a journey that is often physical but always emotional. Along the way, the protagonist faces challenges that test not just their survival, but their values, their beliefs and the sense of self. There's usually a central conflict between the individual personal desires and expectations imposed by family, community or tradition. Growth emerges through trial, through failure, reflection, loss, and the slow accumulation of insight. Traditionally these stories end in resolution. the protagonist matures, finds their place in society and reconciles their inner self with the world around them. It's a hopeful arc, sometimes bittersweet, but ultimately integrative. But that's only part of the story, because in contemporary literature, and increasingly in games like Life is Strange, the Bildungsroman is no longer so tidy. In postmodern, feminist and queer retellings, the path to maturity is often fractured, the conclusion ambiguous. Protagonists may never fully integrate into the society, because the society around them is flawed, alienating or oppressive. These narratives push back against the assumption that coming of age must mean fitting in. Instead, they celebrate complexity, fragmented identities, open-ended growth, characters who refuse easy resolutions, and who forge meaning in the margins rather than the mainstream. At the center of every coming-of-age story lies a transformation. Not just a shift in age or circumstance, but in consciousness, a turning of the self, not forward necessarily, just inward, deeper. This transformation isn't biological, it's not passive. It's not something that just happens as we drift towards adulthood, it's earned through experience, through upheaval. It's a product of betrayal, grief, love and guilt. Of seeing the world differently than you did the day before, the day you stepped out of your house. Maturity in this sense doesn't come quietly, it comes through conflict, through moral failure, to the slow unraveling of inherited illusions. And Life is Strange stages this process with remarkable intimacy. We meet Max Caulfield at the moment of in-between. She's quiet, tentative, observant to a fault. A girl more comfortable behind the camera than in front of people. She's caught between adolescence and adulthood, between creativity and self-doubt. Her world is small. Dorm rooms, classroom anxieties, glances from people she used to know. She doesn't quite belong. She watches life more than she lives it. But everything changes when she returns to Chloe. Their reunion doesn't just reignite their friendship, it cracks Max's world open. Chloe is chaos, fire and memory. She drags buried feelings to the surface, guilt, nostalgia and unresolved grief. She's angry, hurting, firstly loyal and emotionally volatile, and through her, Max is pulled into a deeper current. This bond becomes the emotional center of the game. It's messy, tender, and sometimes painful. When Max returns to Arcadia Bay, she doesn't just come home. She re-enters a life she left behind, and for Chloe that absence is more than emotional, it's a wound. In Max's silence, Chloe lost more than a friend. She lost a concert, a shared history, something to hold on to in the storm that followed. Her father died, Rachel disappeared, and now suddenly Max is back, and Chloe meets that return with a mix of longing, resentment, and barely contained pain. She's angry, but more than that, she's fractured. Chloe moves to the world with a desperate defiance, a self-destructive edge that masks how deeply she wants to be seen, to be held, to not be left again. Max, by stepping back into her orbit, becomes both a comfort and a disruption. For Max, Chloe isn't just a familiar face either, she is a catalyst. Through her, Max is jolted out of passivity, out of her quiet detachment. She's forced to feel, to remember, to choose. The bond pulls Max out from behind the lens and into the frame. Chloe's presence forces Max to confront the consequence of her absence, to take responsibility for what it means to matter to someone, to reckon with the connection that refuses to be neat. But Chloe is transformed too. Max becomes her anchor, her reminder of who she used to be and maybe who she could be again. The bond isn't simple and it's not safe. It teeters on the edge of codependency. Chloe leans on Max for emotional stability, and Max in return begins to shape her choices around Chloe's well-being, sometimes at the cost of her own. It's a familiar dynamic to many adolescent friendships, deep, consuming, and impossible to define. Because identity, well, real identity, isn't forged in isolation. It's not a mask we forge. It's relational. It emerges in the messy, painful, beautiful spaces between people. Max and Chloe doesn't just discover themselves. They become themselves through each other, their shared history, their grief, their arguments, their laughter, and maybe especially their silences. This is what Life is Strange captures so poignantly. A self-footage shaped in tension and intimacy, and the push and pull between love and autonomy, between who we were and who we are becoming. The relationship doesn't offer clarity, it offers transformation, and every choice the player makes, whether to support Chloe, to challenge her, to save her, or let her go, reshapes that transformation. It's not a safe harbor from the chaos of adolescence, it is the chaos. Life is Strange is often celebrated as a milestone in queer storytelling, but not because it makes a grand statement, not because it offers the climactic declaration of identity. It does something more subtle, and in many ways more honest. It captures the uncertainty. The relationship between Max and Chloe is never explicitly labeled, and yet it's there. The tension, the possibility, the longing. Depending on the choices you make as a player, their bond can take an overtly romantic form, a kiss. But even if you never choose to kiss, even if the romance remains unspoken, the game still makes you feel it, pulsing just beneath the surface. And that's what makes it so deeply resonant, because for many queer adolescents, that's exactly what it feels like. Not certainty, not clarity, the kind of searching, an ache that doesn't always have a name, something real, even if it goes unspoken. What sets Life is Strange apart is that it doesn't treat this connection as a twist or a subplot. Max and Chloe's relationship is the story. Queerness here isn't treated as a destination, it's a process. Max's feelings emerge gradually, folded into memory. She's not falling in love in the traditional sense, she's remembering something that never had a name. The intimacy bleeds across boundaries. Friends and lover, comfort and desire, familiarity and fear. And the game lets that ambiguity breathe, but it goes even deeper. Because Life is Strange doesn't just tell a queer story, it feels queer. Its structure mirrors a kind of queer temporality. Max's power to rewind time, to undo, revisit, reframe, is more than just a mechanic, it becomes a metaphor for a kind of adolescence that unfolds in loops, not lines. For many queer people, identity doesn't arrive on schedule, it lingers, it returns. It's shaped by erasure, delay, or the ache of things that almost were. Max doesn't get to move cleanly from past to present to future. She circles, she reconsiders, she rewrites. This is what set Life is Strange apart from traditional coming-of-age stories, especially those built around heterosexual romance, where fulfillment is framed as an arrival, a finish line. Instead, it joins a newer tradition of modern queer Bildungsromans, stories that don't aim to solve queer identity, but to honor it, to give space for longing, for emotional labor, for chosen intimacy over scripted destiny. It's the same tradition we see in Jeanette Winterson's Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, or Alice Oseman's Radio Silence. These stories don't seek resolution, they seek recognition. And Life is Strange in its quiet, aching way gives us exactly that. As much as love shapes a story's characters, so does grief. It distorts the decisions and drives their most human moments. In most coming-of-age stories, loss is a single event, an inciting incident. But here Life is Strange, grief is continuous. It loops, mutates. It re-emerges across timelines, across relationships, and across emotional boundaries. It is the architecture of the story itself, and nowhere is this more embodied than in Chloe Price. Chloe's grief isn't clean or contained, it's loud and chaotic. It's dyed blue and spoken through sarcasm. She lashes out not because she doesn't care, but because she has learned that caring means getting hurt. Her rebellion, her defiance and her recklessness are not acts of apathy, they are grief in motion. Max on the other hand begins in quiet alienation. She's disconnected not just from Chloe but from herself. But as the story unfolds, Max is pulled into grief. Not only Chloe's but her own. Because in timeline after timeline, Chloe dies again and again. Each time Max is forced to confront the unbearable truth. The loss cannot be undone. But even with time on your side, grief finds you. The rewind mechanic, the player's supposed superpower, becomes an emotional trap. Every choice carries weight, every decision might bring loss. Max learns that grief isn't something you fix, it's something you face. And this emotional dislocation isn't unique to Max and Chloe. It radiates outward into the lives of nearly every character in Arcadia Bay. Take Kate Marsh, kind, quiet and devout. She's pushed to the brink by bullying and institutional neglect. Her suffering is subtle, internalized, but when she stands on the roof of Blackwell Academy, fully intending to jump, everything stops. This moment, where the player can either save her or fail to, becomes one of the game's most harrowing moments. It asks not just what we can do, but what we notice, what we say when it matters most. And then there's Nathan Prescott, the far side of the spectrum from Kate, framed as the antagonist. But underneath the violence is a young man drowning, crushed by family pressure, mental illness, and a legacy of abuse. His privilege doesn't protect him, it isolates him. Like so many in Arcadia Bay, he's a child carrying adult damage. Everyone in this game is reaching for meaning and connection, for someone to say, I see you. And in that reaching, rebellion takes shape. Sometimes it's Chloe's weed, sometimes it's a gun, and sometimes it's silence. But rebellion in Life is Strange is always a response to grief, a refusal to go quietly in a world that keeps taking. Chloe channels that rage like Holden Caulfield in The Catch in the Rye, masking sorrow with anger, and lashing out at a world that has let her down again and again. Max, by contrast, mirrors someone like Charlie in The Perks of Being a Wildflower. Observant, quiet, and slowly awakening to the emotional weight that others carry. Where Chloe externalizes, Max internalizes. But both must learn what it means to grieve, to care, to grow, and to hold space for pain without being consumed by it. The ability to rewind time in the game isn't a power fantasy. It's more like a moral engagement simulator. You make a choice, then you rewind, maybe try something else, and then you rewind again. You test the waters of every possibilities, and still the water is murky. Time travel here doesn't erase mistakes, it amplifies their weight. Unlike most time travel stories, which treat rewinding as a way to prevent catastrophe or perfect outcomes, Life is Strange does something different. It lets you fix the moment, but never the ripple. Say something kinder, act more decisively, take the blame, or try again. And even when the result seems better, it's never without a cost. One thread repaired, another phrase. Symbolically, Max's power becomes a metaphor for something deeply human, adolescent indecision. It reflects the desperate desire to undo regret, to take back what was said, to pause life until you're ready, to fix the past before the future arrives. But the more Max rewinds, the more trapped she becomes. Each new attempt at control only reveals how fragile the control really is. This is where Life is Strange turns its mechanic into a philosophical challenge. What does it mean to make the right choice, when every option carries its own shadow? Can the past be fixed? And even if it can, should it be? Unlike most time travel stories, Life is Strange doesn't operate under deterministic rules. It doesn't follow a single, fixed timeline, where events are blocked into place. Instead, every decision Max makes fractures time, splitting it into branching realities, each with their own ethical consequences. These aren't just narrative what-ifs, they're lived experiences, real timelines with real emotional weight. Each time Max intervenes, she doesn't erase the past, she creates a new future. And with that new future comes a new burden. Because her power doesn't absolve her of responsibility, it magnifies it. She's not a passive traveler through fate, she's an agent, responsible for what unfolds, precisely because she can act. Even the classic grandfather paradox is reimagined here. Traditionally the paradox asks, what happens if you travel back in time and prevent your own existence? But Life is Strange isn't interested in logic puzzles, it's interested in emotional casualty. When Max travels back far enough to save Chloe's father from dying, she doesn't break the timeline, she replaces one tragedy with another. Chloe's father lives, but Chloe herself is paralyzed, in pain, and asking Max to help her end her life. The game reframes the question entirely, not can we fix the past, but at what cost. To understand what's happening here, we can turn to Jean-Paul Sartre, one of the central figures of existentialist philosophy. In Being and Nothingness and Existentialism is a Humanism, Sartre makes a radical claim. Human beings are condemned to be free. We didn't choose to be conscious, we didn't ask to exist. But now that we are here, we bear full responsibility for what we do. There is no divine script, no cosmic rulebook, no predetermined fate to fall back on. Every choice we make defines who we are, and by extension what we think humanity ought to be. Life is Strange dramatizes this kind of freedom with startling clarity. Each time Max rewinds, she's not undoing a mistake, she's choosing again and again and again. Each choice isn't just a branch of the story, it's a moral declaration. Whether she comforts Chloe, or saves Kate Marsh, or ultimately decides the fate of Arcadia Bay, Max isn't following a moral path laid out for her, she's writing one. And Sartre would say, that's what it means to be free, but also what it means to suffer. Because freedom isn't liberation, it's anguish. Real freedom means there's no one to blame, no external authority to give us the right answer, no safety net. It's just us and the choices we make, and the people we become because of them. That's what Life is Strange gets so right. It doesn't ask you to win, it asks you to choose, knowing that every choice has a cost. And in doing so it captures the existentialist condition in its rawest form. Freedom not as a fantasy, but as a burden. If Sartre's existentialism forces us to confront the weight of freedom, then Nietzsche takes it one step further, by asking not just what we choose, but how fully we can live with it. Friedrich Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence is one of the most unsettling thought experiments in philosophy. It asks us to imagine this. What if every moment of our life, every joy, every mistake, and every heartbreak had to be lived again and again forever? No revision, no escape, only repetition. Would you say yes to it? Would you affirm your life, every decision, as it is, not just once, but for eternity? For Nietzsche, this question isn't a metaphysical one, it's existential. To embrace eternal recurrence is to say yes to life in its eternity, not just the beauty, not just the meaning, but the pain, the failure, the grief. In Life is Strange, eternal recurrence isn't a thought experiment, it's Max's reality. She lives through timelines again and again, replaying events, redoing conversations, trying to undo pain. But no matter how many times she rewinds, the grief returns in new forms. Loss reshapes itself. Nothing is truly escaped. Max isn't asked to affirm joy. She's asked to affirm grief. To live with what cannot be undone. To choose not what is best, but what is. So when Nietzsche questions how we live with repetition, Pierre-Simon Laplace asks something colder, more mathematical. What if the universe is completely determined? Laplace imagined a being, what's now called as Laplace's demon, who knows the position and momentum of every particle in the universe at a given moment. With that knowledge, this being could predict the future with perfect accuracy. There would be no surprises and, well, no freedom. Just cause and effect, unfolding forever. In that kind of universe, free will would be an illusion. Every decision would simply be the inevitable product of everything that came before. And this is where Life is Strange sits on the fence. David Hume and Daniel Dennett are compatibilists. They argue that free will and determinism can coexist. They suggest that freedom isn't about escaping cause and effect. It's about acting from yourselves, your values, your reasons, and your heart. You're free not because your choices are random, but because they are yours. And that's exactly where Life is Strange finds its moral center. Max's decisions matter not because they exist in a vacuum, but because they emerge from who she is becoming. She acts without certainty, she chooses without guarantees, and in doing so she defines herself, not as a master of time, but as a person who still dares to care. Even when the world breaks, even when no outcome feels clean, and even when freedom feels like anguish. If Life is Strange resists the comfort of deterministic certainty and embraces freedom as responsibility, then its final moments bring attention to its most painful points. This isn't just a question of narrative closure, it's an ethical rupture. There is no neutral ground, only the emotional cost that follows. On the surface, a utilitarian reading seems obvious. Sacrificing Chloe, tragic as it is, saves Arcadia Bay. It spares the lives of hundreds, children, families, and friends. From this perspective, Chloe's death becomes the lesser evil, a life weighed against many, a painful but clear verdict. But Life is Strange doesn't let that logic settle, because there's another lens, deontological ethics, especially as defined by Immanuel Kant. Kant's philosophy insists, people must never be used as a means to an end, they are ends in themselves. Chloe is not an abstract variable, she's a person, with agency, with history, with a soul bound to Max's in ways that resist quantification. Choosing to sacrifice her for the sake of others might save lives, but it also risks violating her dignity. From this angle, loyalty becomes duty, and love becomes principle. But there's also a third perspective, virtue ethics. Born in ancient Greece to the fathers of Western philosophy, Aristotle, Socrates and Plato, these asks not what is right, but who is right. What kind of person is Max becoming? If she saves Chloe, is that compassion, courage, loyalty? Or is it selfishness, putting one bond above many lives? And if she sacrificed Chloe, is that selflessness, moral strength? Or is it betrayal of love, of growth, of everything she's fought to preserve? There's no easy answer, and Life is Strange doesn't pretend there is, because its final decision isn't about being right, it's about being human. And sometimes being human means making a choice you can't explain, one you have to carry, one you have to live with. In the end, Life is Strange doesn't ask you to be a hero in the traditional sense. There is no glory, no triumph. Max Caulfield is not the stoic, hyper-competent male savior we've seen 100 times before. She isn't armed with bravado, she doesn't conquer or dominate. Instead, her strength lies in how she cares, how she carries the emotional fallout of a world in crisis. Her journey is about connection, not control. This design aligns with what scholars have called Ludic feminist resistance, a narrative mode and gameplay structure that pushes back against a typical male-centered empowerment fantasy. In so many games, power means agency through violence. Here, power means responsibility through empathy. Max becomes in many ways a mirror of the cultural expectations often placed on women, not as a celebration of those burdens, but as a quiet critique of them. She's expected to fix what others have broken, to absorb others' pain, to carry the emotional and moral weight of impossible situations. The game doesn't present this role as ideal, it presents it as heavy, complex and often unfair. Life is Strange allows us to feel that weight, to question it, and recognize how these gendered expectations shape not just Max's journey, but the emotional labor that women and girls are often asked to perform in real life. But Life is Strange also subverts what film theorist Laura Mulvey famously called the male gaze. The tendency in visual media to frame women as a passive object of desire, positioned to be looked at rather than to look themselves. Video games have historically embraced this gaze. Lara Croft in her early Tomb Raider iterations was marked as much for her hyper-sexualized body proportions as for adventuring skill. In Dead or Alive, female fighters bounce in slow motion for the player's enjoyment. And even in narrative-heavy games like Metal Gear Solid, female characters like Quiet are designed around the excuse of story-based nudity, justified by plot, but unmistakably aimed at a male fantasy. These aren't just design choices, they're narrative structures that reduce women to aesthetic surfaces. They tell players not to empathize with these women, but to consume them. Life is Strange refuses that. Max is never objectified, her clothes are modest, and her body is never sexualized. The camera doesn't linger on her curves or her face in soft light. It doesn't slice her into parts. It lingers with her. We see the world not by looking at her, but by looking through her camera, her journal, her thoughts. In this way, Max reverses the traditional role of female characters in games. She's not a spectacle, she's the observer. As a photographer, she chooses the frame, she controls the gaze. And her gaze is not exploitative, it's intimate, melancholic, and ethically attuned. She sees not to possess, but to remember. In Life is Strange, Max's story is not just feminist in how it sees, but who it centers, how it plays, and what it dares to say. And it's here that the game makes one of its most lasting contributions, not just in what it subverts, but in what it creates. Because when it launched in 2015, Life is Strange marked something rare and remarkable, a cultural shift in what video games could be. It wasn't the first game to feature queer characters, and it wasn't the first to tell a quiet, emotional story. But it's one of the first mainstream adjacent games to center queerness, girlhood and emotional vulnerability, not as side notes but as a driving force for a full-length narrative. The game helped catalyze a creative wave in the indie space, one that didn't copy but built on what it had made possible. Games like Night in the Woods, If Found and Tell Me Why carried the torch forward. These stories shared a commitment to queer narratives, feminist ethics and emotional design, but expanded the terrain. They explored trans identity, neurodivergence, class struggle and generational trauma. They challenged not only how games look, but how they feel. Most importantly, they no longer had to code queerness in metaphor. They could say it, show it, and live it. In this way, Life is Strange didn't just tell a story, it opened the door. It helped carve out space in the gaming industry where tenderness, queerness, and care were no longer seen as niche, but as necessary. Life is Strange reframes what digital storytelling can be. Not just interactive, not just artistic, but profoundly human. It takes the adolescent experience, so often dismissed as melodrama or cliché, and reclaims it as something sacred, a crucible where memory, identity, grief, and love collide. Coming of age isn't about reaching certainty, it's about learning to live with uncertainty. The vulnerability is not weakness, but strength. The care is a kind of courage. The choices we make, however small and however painful, shape who we become. And that in itself is powerful. Life is Strange never promises that everything will be okay. It doesn't offer neat endings. It offers meaning in the mess, in the aftermath, in the trying. And yes, things break and people will leave. The past can't be undone. But even so, you can still grow, you can still care, and you can still choose. Because empathy, memory, and love leave traces. Not just in the world, but in all of us. And maybe that's why Life is Strange endures. Not because it asks us to be perfect, because it asks us to try, to carry the weight, to keep going. Because even in the face of loss, in the face of uncertainty and impossible choices, there's beauty in trying, and there's hope in being human.